So thanks a lot to the organizers for having me here, and also to my moderator and discussant. So I'm happy to present you this paper, which is a joint work with Francesco. Both of us used to be PhD students in Bologna a few years ago, and this is how the project started. So let me introduce you to the project and to the question we asked with this paper. So the idea is that the main question we want to answer with this paper is, what do consumers know and what do consumers want when they're operating on online platforms that are mediated by algorithms? And this question originates from mainly two observations that we made. So the first one is that from the literature, we know that by now digital platforms are widely relying on algorithms, and we especially have in mind ranking algorithms. And this is what determines what consumers see on platforms, and has also already been found to have a steering effect on consumer choices, ultimately also affecting market outcomes. On the other side, the other observation we made is that we believe, given the relevance of this phenomenon, we believe that relatively little is known on how well consumers understand the functioning of those algorithms, often embedded in the platforms that they rely on. And in particular, we asked ourselves whether we could contribute by answering the question of to what extent consumers understand the functioning of those algorithms, and also to what extent consumers will change their behavior if they had a more deep knowledge about the functioning of those. Essentially, this is what we do with this paper. And to answer this question, we rely on the case of Amazon. And in particular, we focus on one single completely algorithmic-driven feature of the Amazon e-commerce platform, that is the buy box. So I guess probably in this audience, most of you already are familiar with what the buy box is, but I'm just going to show you in a glimpse what it is in case someone never saw that. So what we have in mind is, so imagine you're shopping on Amazon, so you want to buy something on the platform. You already have an idea of the product you want to get. So in this case, you want to buy this camera by Kodak. And what happens is that at some point in your purchasing process, you will be redirected to this. So like the product page in which you have this big picture of the product. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to have some information. So everything that is in the blue dashed rectangle is what we call the buy box. Everything that is there is essentially providing information about the default deal that you're going to accept in case you purchase the product by clicking on either the add to cart or buy now button. The idea is that whenever multiple sellers are listing the same exact product, one of the deals by those sellers is going to be listed in this, is going to be presented in this very prominent position. And all others will be relegated to a secondary page, which consumers can access upon clicking on this button that I'm showing you right now. So upon clicking, you're going to be redirected on a secondary page where eventually you can browse all alternative deals. So the main problem we want to ask is essentially how well consumers understand how this buy box default selection is operated. We believe that this is an important question for many reasons. And the main ones are, like, first, the fact that we know that Amazon is a very peculiar case because Amazon has this dual role on the platform by being at the same time both the platform designer and a competitor among sellers itself. The second reason is that the second and other reasons relate to the fact that so first, this form of algorithm embedded in the buy box, we believe this represents sort of an even extreme case of ranking algorithms, because normally by ranking algorithms, we mean algorithms that are presenting us with lists. And what changes is the prominence given based on the position in the list. What we have here is an extreme form because we're going to have sort of a binary winning-losing outcome. So whoever wins in this ranking is going to attract almost all the visibility. And this is an interesting feature of the buy box, but it's not unique to the Amazon platform. So there is also other platforms relying on these forms of ranking of extreme ranking algorithms. And then the last 2 points relate to the fact that so the main point is that how this default selection is operated is not known. So the algorithm is proprietary, owned by the Amazon platform, and there is no perfect transparency of what are the criteria, for example, for this selection. And this is what we're gonna investigate essentially, to what extent consumers are aware of this aspect. And then the last, but not least point relates to the relevance. So we know that previous estimates done by European and US regulators estimated that the buy box has a huge relevance, ranging from something like 70% of sales to up to 98% of all sales. So this small button is essentially, this small rectangle is channeling the vast majority of sales on the platform. Going back to the question, what we are going to answer with this paper is 2 questions. So the first one is, do consumers correctly understand how the buy box algorithm works on Amazon? And second, would they behave differently if they did? So conditional on having more transparent and complete information on how this works. Before I jump more on the details of the paper, what I wanted to give is just a flavor of how we thought about the question, and because of that, how we developed the project. So our main working hypothesis would be that in this context, so when we study consumer search on algorithmically mediated platforms, what we have in mind is that consumers' behavior will not be only determined by consumer search costs, which is usually the basic assumption of most consumer search models, but also it will depend on consumers' beliefs and understanding of algorithms that are determining what are the options that they can see on the platforms. So we believe that there is this additional layer that can better describe consumer choices in this specific environment. And the idea is that our working hypothesis would be that if there is some uncertainty about how those algorithms work, this might lead consumers to have incorrect beliefs about how well these algorithmic selections are going to be serving their interests. And if this is the case, by providing them with more transparent information, we might be able to trigger some beliefs updating that is ultimately going to be transferred to some behavioral changes. And this we're going to be testing empirically. So what we're going to be doing is, it's technically called a frame field experiment. So we're going to be on the real Amazon platform, and what we're going to be, and this will allow us to observe how real Amazon users behave in terms of search and selection choices. And the only thing we're going to be manipulating is the amount of information we give to consumers in terms of the buy box. So with respect to the buy box functioning. So this is going to be our main manipulation, and then we're going to be observing choices. And our results, just to give you a flavor of what we're going to be finding, is hint to the fact that consumers overestimate how well, ex ante, how well the algorithm is serving their interests. And then when they're more transparently informed, they're going to update their beliefs and adjust their behavior. So if there is no question, I will go. The idea is that I will first introduce you what is the theoretical framework we have in mind when we are describing the project, and then I'm going to give you more details about the experimental design before I show you the results. Before I move on, I just want to quickly catch up on the literature because of time's sake. So I think we believe this paper is connected to different strands of the literature. So first and foremost, all the papers studying consumer search and prominence effects, especially on platforms. And then we also naturally relate to I would say, a now rising field of experiments conducted on platforms, and especially e-commerce platforms. And to this respect, I think the paper that is the closest to ours is the one by Faronado and others, in which they, again, work on Amazon, but to investigate different questions related to the presence and the visibility of Amazon's deals on search results for consumers. And then we also naturally relate to all the literature that has been studying the buy box mechanism more in detail, and to this end, I guess the paper that is the most close to us is the one of my amazing discussant, who is studying in a bit more comprehensive way what is the effect of the buy box, so very close in topic, but from a bit of a different and more general perspective in terms of what is the consequences of having the buy box on both consumer choices and also more general equilibrium consequences in terms of also seller pricing and enter and exit from the market. So moving from here, the theoretical framework we developed is a simplified framework that we somehow take from the literature and augment to incorporate this role of beliefs that we think is relevant in this context. So what we rely on is a simple framework in which we're going to have sellers on one side. So on the one end, we're going to have, as we said, multiple and sellers in this case that are listing the same homogeneous product. For each of these sellers, there is going to be a deal that is characterized by two main features. That is the deal quality, which we can think of, in this case, given that the product is homogeneous, as, for example, seller ratings, shipping and return terms. So everything that relates to the deal itself, more than the product. And then we're going to have a price characteristic that is just the price listed by the seller for that product deal. On our platform, that deals will be ranked, and based on the position, every deal is identified by the index I. So we're going to have the buy box winner, which is the deal index with I equal to 1, of course, so the first one. On the consumer side, we are going to have a consumer who gets some utility that is a function of the distance between this quality and price characteristics of the deal. And we believe, we sketch the consumer problem as essentially having to decide whether they want to get information about all alternative deals or stick with the information that is provided about the buy box deal for free. So the idea is that since the buy box deal is already upfront shown on the platform, acquiring information about the characteristics of the buy box deal is assumed for us to be costless. Instead, getting information about the characteristics of all other deals that are listed on the secondary page, as we saw, we assume that is a costly effort that consumers need to make. And how costly that is going to be depending on consumers' characteristics. So we're going to have, and this is going to be captured in our framework by this theta parameter. Given this framework, the main choice we are interested in modeling is somehow the binary choice that, yes, do we have a question?
Yeah, there's a question.
I would
Yes,
like
go ahead,
to,
Daniela.
oh, sorry. So it's
Yes.
for me? No. I wanted just to know if the model wants to have one or more quantities, so they can exchange just one unit of the good or whatever they want.
Thanks for the question. So we are thinking about one unit only. So this is somehow an isolated, we are thinking about one unit that the consumer can get. So in this case, yes. So if that answers the question, I just wanted to wrap up that given this simple framework, what we believe is the binary choice of interest for us is whether consumers want to engage into this costly search effort or not. So the idea is that if they don't engage in search, they're going to stick to the buy box deal. That is the one that they get information for free upfront. If they instead engage into search, they're going to get, at the end of the process, they're going to stick with the deal that is the one that maximizes their utility out of all alternatives listed. Of course, in the population, this will, the share of consumers who are going to be opting for the buy box will depend on the distribution of search costs. So the main outcome of interest in this context will be what is the share of those of consumers that are going to be willing to, that are going to be somehow giving up the chance of searching because they're happy with the default option. So what this is, so this theoretical framework is somehow simplified version of the one by Olivier and Touron in the paper of 2019. And what we do to this is to add this extra layer of consumers' beliefs. So what we do is to consider a two-dimensional heterogeneity from consumers. And what changes across consumers in our setup is not only search costs, but also beliefs about the buy box algorithm. And specifically, what we have in mind in terms of beliefs is how well do consumers believe that the buy box algorithm is already selecting what is the best option for them. Because of course, I mean, we can think of the buy box algorithm as an interesting time-saving device. So the main point of interest will be how well is this default selection already serving our main objectives in when we engage into search. I mean, how well how well we trust that this algorithm is already doing the best for us is captured by this gamma parameter, which is gonna discount what we perceive as consumers, what we perceive as consumers in terms of quality of the default option. And this is how this is gonna enter into our model. And as a result, this is also gonna impact what is the share of consumers eventually ending up with the buy box, sticking with the buy box. This being said, our idea is that we're going to have a world in which consumers are going to be differing along two dimensions. So individual search costs and beliefs on the platform and the buy box algorithm. So these theta and gamma parameters. And
sorry,
we're going to be.
Yeah. Could I ask a quick question here?
Of course.
If there is only one offer, okay, so then by definition the buy box has this offer. It feels like the gamma in your model still influences the consumer's perception of the quality of that one offer. But the buy box has no other offer that it could pick. Is that right? Am I just taking the model too seriously at the moment? I know it's not like exactly.
Yeah, no. I mean, you're right. I think we never thought about this option. I'm also thinking that, so I'm not an expert. I mean, like, I don't know what is the most recent data on this, but I think it's not necessarily the case that the buy box is there, even if there is one single option. But I mean, we haven't thought. I don't think we ever thought about this like super extreme option. But yes, I guess in that case it would be that it might decrease marginally. I mean, how much I value the buy box option, but still, I think in our design we don't really have the outside option of not buying, especially in the experiment. So I think probably that is not I mean, super influential. But thanks for raising it. We're surely gonna make sure it makes sense in our context. So going back to the experiment, this was just to say that what we're going to be trying to manipulate with interventions is exactly this, somehow the degree of information that consumers have on how this buy box selection is operated. And we have, I mean, in this context, we have two main working hypotheses. So the first one is that, and the idea is that if, as we were saying, there is uncertainty and then consumers might have incorrect beliefs, by providing correct information, which what we expect to be happening in theory is that if a possibly positive share of consumers are going to be updating beliefs and changing their behavior, this might change the frequency of times in which consumers do inspect the full list of offers, and possibly as a consequence of that, this is also going to increase the share of consumers who are not going to stick with the buy box. So this is going to increase the share of consumers who opt out. And this, we believe, could operate through two main channels. So the first one is like a purely informational channel. So it might be that there is some consumers who don't know of the presence of these alternative deals. So the first thing we want to make sure is that we can differentiate whether the information we are providing is just making consumers aware of the presence of alternatives, or provided that they are aware about alternatives, is only somehow marginally increasing the amount of information that they have about how the selection is operated. So our design is going to be tailored to the possibility of disentangling these two channels. So whether it's information per se about the presence of alternatives, or the information about how among these alternatives the default is selected. So I'm going to jump on the experimental design unless there is questions. So the main idea is that, as we said, this is going to be a frame-filled experiment. And this is because on the one hand side, we're going to be observing real consumer choices. And this is because we're going to be recruiting a real sample of Italian Amazon users through an external company called Bilenti. And those consumers are going to be engaging in asynchronous online sessions in which they take part in our experiment and they, follow their experimental path. On the other hand, another thing we do that makes us close to the real setting that we want to study is the fact that we are going to be relying on the real Amazon marketplace. So we're going to recruit those consumers, and those consumers are going to be doing actions on the real Amazon.it marketplace. The thing that will change with respect to when consumers somehow e-shop on the in the wild is that we are going to restrict the set of products and the amount of the budget that they're going to have when making these e-shopping choices. And I'm going to motivate that in a second, but we're going to make sure that consumers, upon showing up to our sessions, they know exactly more or less what is the type of products they're going to see. And also we select best-selling electronic products because we believe these are somehow general interest products and also very easy to resell, such that even if our consumers don't have a very specific need of the specific product, they still have an interest to get an high-quality product such that they can resell that later. And then we're going to fix the budget so that we can also have some control on the type of product and the price of those products in our sample. Lastly, I'm just going to reiterate that the platform is exactly the one that you're going to find online. So we are not manipulating how the platform looks. The only thing we're going to be manipulating is the amount of information consumers have before they engage into the task. This is a snapshot of the flow. So the way the experiment works is the following. First, we recruit consumers. So this external agency is going to recruit participants. The first thing they do is to answer a short pre-experimental question in which we ask them about their habits and also how long have they been using Amazon and these kind of questions. At the end of this, they're going to be receiving the information. So we're going to have the different participants are going to be split into 3 different treatment arms. And I'm going to show you the information in the next slide. After reading the information, consumers will answer some questions. We essentially make sure that consumers read the information we gave them. And then they're going to proceed to the e-shopping task that is going to be happening on Amazon.it. The last part is this post-experimental questionnaire in which, after they have engaged in the task, we debrief consumers about the buy box and ask them directly some questions about how much they like it and how much they knew about it. After this, the experiment is essentially over, but some participants, if they want, can opt in a non-mandatory task that is essentially a tedious task that we use to measure to get an external measure of their cost of time. After the main experiment is over, we're going to have a follow-up roughly 1 month afterwards that we use to check whether the effects we find in the main experiment are to some extent long-lasting. So as we said, the first part is the pre-experimental survey. This is a standard questionnaire in which we ask them questions about themselves and their style, like the e-shopping style and experience. The second part is this crucial part that we manipulate. So participants are going to be assigned to one of these treatments only. And the baseline treatment is going to be an active control treatment. So this means that also consumers in the baseline are going to be reading some information before engaging in the task. But this information will be completely unrelated to the buy box. So yes. We can't hear.
So I would like to know, as far as the endowment, you are not giving them this endowment, or you are giving to them the endowment because since it's ranging from 25 to 100 and so on. And then, the goods are different or are equal? That
okay,
they
so
can
I'm
buy.
gonna, yes.
You're gonna have to say this. Okay, perfect.
No. I think, so with respect to the products, since I'm not gonna have it in the slides explicitly, so we're gonna select essentially roughly more than 10 products, and those are gonna be the same across treatments. So we can control for products effects. And in terms of incentives, I'm gonna tell you in the next slide. So going back to the information, we said we have the active, so the baseline is gonna be just information on Amazon. The partial information treatment is going to be a treatment in which we give them information about the presence of alternatives. And so that we can somehow use this treatment to see what is the marginal impact of just making consumers aware about the fact that there is other alternatives other than the default. And then we're going to have a full information treatment in which we also tell them about the presence of alternatives, but on top of this, we also hint them to think about the fact that this default selection is operated by the platform. So we try to use a very neutral language in which we only mention the fact that this the algorithm operated in selection is not public. But then to compensate the fact that this might be interpreted as very negative, we say that the company states that the selection is done by favoring competitive pricing, good reviews, and good inventory management and shipping conditions. So the idea is that they're just somehow forced to think about the fact that there is a selection, and that the thing that they see on the main product page has been selected out of that alternatives list. After the information, we go to the main shopping task. So what happens here is that our consumers, when they started with our experiment, have downloaded a small software that we developed in-house together with some developers. And this is essentially a web scraping tool that allows us to observe what they do during the task. So when they reach this stage, our consumers are prompted to open the software. And what the software does is to launch a Google Chrome browser page in which they land on the Amazon.it login page. So the first thing they do is they log in with their credentials. Of course, we don't store this information. It's just like a sanity check for us to make sure that they are real Amazon users. And after they log in, they are redirected to the product page of the products that we selected. And they're going to see, when they reach this stage, what is the product that is actually the object of their task. And they're also informed of what is their budget for this purchase. So they know that at the end of the whole experiment, and they're going to get this information before they leave the software, some people are going to be selected, and those people who are going to be selected are going to receive the product in kind, shipped by the seller and the dealer they identified. And in case they save some budget, they also receive this cash transfer equal to the budget they saved. So the idea is that we wanted to recreate both monetary and non-monetary incentives to get a good deal. And of course, if they don't get selected, they're just going to get their fixed participation fee that everyone else is getting for taking part in the experiment. So there it is, and this is how it looks like. So what happens during the task is that they're going to have this browser page, and then on the right-hand side, they're going to have this small window in which we remind them of the steps. So the idea is that they see the product, they can check the offers if they want, and then the final step is that they need to add to their cart the deal that they want to purchase. And of course, this is just something that we find funny, like storing this IO book, but this is not the kind of products that we offer to consumers. Okay, moving on. After this is done, we're going to have a post-experimental survey in which we ask some check questions, and we also ask them directly some buy box evaluation questions. At the very end, as anticipated, for those who want, they can also engage in this tedious counting zero task that we just use to measure how willing they are to engage in a very small stake tedious task at the end. So they can engage up to for 10 minutes, and we track how long they stay in the task and if they opt in. After this is all over, we are going to recruit our participants roughly 1 month after for the follow-up. What happens in the follow-up is essentially we ask them again these buy box evaluation questions to see if their perceptions change after 1 month, also because they had the chance to do some more e-shopping by themselves and, for example, get some more information. And then we also have this willingness to pay task. The willingness to pay task works as follows. So at some point, after they ask again the evaluation questions, we ask them, how would you customize the buy box if you could? So they can tell us what are the dimensions they would use to customize the buy box selection if they could. After this question, we show them again a product that is again selected among electronics, retail, bestseller products. And this time, we don't ask them to select what they prefer as a deal, but we just tell them, if you're selected, do you want us to ship you the product by buying that through the buy box, or do you want us to customize the choice of the deal based on your preferences that you just stated? And the idea is that we ask this question multiple times, and this customization service comes at a cost that is varied across different questions. And based on their answers, we can estimate their willingness to pay for this customized selection process. And this I'm going to show you later. So we're going to also use this as a measure of how long it takes in case this intervention triggers some update for consumers in terms of how useful the buy box selection is. Okay, jumping on the results, I'm going to try to be concise. So I'm going to show you something on consumers' literacy, which was our main, our starting point. Then we're going to look at how the information provision changes consumer search and deal selection behavior. And lastly, we're going to check their answers to the buy box evaluation question. So the first thing we see is how they answer to the consumers in terms of literacy. So what we see here is that when we ask directly consumers to self-report how much they knew about the buy box, so this is what happens at the very end of the experiment after we all debrief them about what the buy box is. So what we see is that there is no strong treatment differences, and so a bit less than half of the consumers say that they knew how the buy box worked. Then there is a substantial share, roughly, a bit more than 40% of the people who say they knew only partially how the buy box worked. And among those, the most common mistake is that people believe that the buy box was automatically selecting the cheapest option. Then, so this being said, we move and look at the data, the choice data in terms of that consumer made during the shopping task. So the first thing we're interested in is whether, what is the probability that consumers inspect the list of alternative deals? And this is what we're estimating here. So we see that in the baseline, the share of consumers who do inspect the list of alternative deals is something more than 10%. This again confirms the regulatory evidence that we discussed at the very beginning. And it is also important to notice that in our sample, in essentially opting for the buy box in many cases was equivalent to leave somehow some money on the table, because in 80% of the cases, consumers could have saved some money by selecting one of the other deals in the list. And this information, if you remember, is visible from the main product page, because when you click on the button below the buy box, you see what is the lowest price possible if you open that alternative deals list. And so what happens is that we see that by giving them partial information, so just telling them about the fact that there is alternatives doesn't change their behavior. Their behavior instead changes when we give them full information. So when we hint them to think about how the selection is operated, this prompts them to search more. And there is an increase of roughly 18 percentage points in the probability that consumers inspect alternative deals. Interestingly, we noticed that this increase in their willingness to search doesn't come on average at the cost of a higher search effort, which we measure in terms of time spent to finalize the process, and also in terms of scrolls on the page. So we see that this is not significantly affected, suggesting that consumers just change the way they use the time that they devote to the purchase process, but don't have to go through a more burdensome search process due to the fact that they're choosing to spec more offers. Then after this, we look at what happens in terms of selection. Here, in terms of what I'm going to discuss as outcomes, is essentially 4 things. So the first thing we're interested in is how many people are going for the buy box winner, which we call PB1. So this means how many people go for the deal that is highlighted at the top right of the main product page. The second thing we're going to look at is, as an alternative to that, whether consumers are opting for the second buy box, which is a feature that by then we already had in Italy due to an antitrust case by the Italian Competition Authority. So that was already in place when we were running our data collection. So for some products, consumers might see this second buy box just below the main buy box in a smaller and shaded area. As an alternative to these two, again, during our data collection, Amazon was experimenting with this compare offers on Amazon feature, which was essentially a preview of some of the other deals that were in the full list. Lastly, if consumers do not opt for any of those, we take this as an indication that, and also we check that consumers are essentially going for one option that is only listed in the secondary page, so that cannot be accessed through the main product page. So this means that they've clicked on this button and opened the other page. Looking at the results, what we see is that, so if we look at unconditional selection, so we just compare across treatments what consumers do, we see that we move from the baseline and the partial information condition in which the vast majority, so more than 90% of consumers go for the buy box winner, to a situation in which this share decreases to something less than 75. And the substitution goes in favor of mostly, both other deals on the main product page and other deals in general only present in the secondary page. Since we saw that our treatments were effective somehow in our first stage sense in pushing consumers to search more, we also want to look at whether conditional on searching or not searching the full list, how do consumers behave? So we split this evidence by differentiating between consumers who have searched the full list and consumers who have not searched the full list across treatments. So the first thing we see is that even among consumers that don't inspect the full list, the information treatment has an effect. So essentially our information treatment per se makes consumers more attentive, or just by essentially raising the salience of the presence of other deals. And this triggers a significant decrease, although smaller in size, in the share of consumers who opt for the buy box, even among those who don't somehow pay the cost of checking the entire list on the secondary page. And then among those who indeed inspected the secondary page, we see that overall the level of the share of consumers who opt for the buy box is substantially lower. So we are ranging between 50 and 70%. Compared to 90 before. And interestingly, we see that consumers are not behaving so differently across treatments, which we take as a good indication of the fact that we are not priming consumers especially negative about the buy box when we are giving them full information. We are just somehow shifting the share of consumers who choose to search the list. And conditional on searching through the full list, they don't have significant behavioral differences, but all of them, they do opt for the buy box way less often. Lastly, I'm gonna try to be fast because I think we are close to the end. We also look at the characteristics of the deals that our consumers selected. And what we see is that there is no substantial difference in terms of suggesting that consumers go for worse options. If anything, the only thing that we find is that consumers go for slightly cheaper options. And when we split this, again, by consumers who inspected the full list and the restricted list, we see that the effect is particularly strong and significant for consumers who stick to the main product page. So those who are treated with the information, but they consider only the restricted set of options on the main page. Lastly, we look at the results of in terms of the evaluation. So now we are back to self-reported outcomes. And here, what we ask them is essentially, what do you think of the buy box? And give us an explanation for why you like it or not, or you don't like it. In terms of numbers, what we see is that the majority of consumers still even after 1 month from the main intervention, so even after they had the time to search for more information and experience a bit more with Amazon during their own activity, the majority believes that the Amazon buy box, somehow the selection mechanism has some flaws. And when we look at the drivers, we see that what consumers claim in particular is that they believe is not clear what was the main reason that specific deal was highlighted in that prominent position. So they think it's not, especially, it's not super clear what is the reason why that specific deal was picked. And also, still a significant share of consumers state that they will engage more in a more extended search in their next purchases. Lastly, we look at the question on the willingness to pay. So as you might remember, we said that during the follow-up, we had our consumers facing this additional task in which they saw again a product, and we asked them whether they wanted us to, in case they got selected, to get the product through the buy box or through a customized service selection process that we would customize based on their preferences. And what we see here is that across treatments, again, after 1 month from the main experiment, participants on average are willing to pay something that is around 4% of the product price to get this customized selection process rather than the buy box default one. And we read that as a sign that, this is not only coming from self-reported question, but also with this incentivized outcome, they still signal room for interest in a customized service that is different from the default one. Now that they all know how the buy box mechanism works because they've been briefed. Wrapping this up, so what we learned from our experiment is that most consumers don't know exactly how the buy box work. So either they don't know at all, or they had incorrect beliefs about which were the selection criteria, and especially the driving. The main mistake was that consumers thought this was the cheapest option in any case. Then the second thing in this case, we document, we provide some more additional evidence on the fact that the buy box winner, in absence of any information treatment, takes the lion's share. So more than 90% of consumers, in absence of any intervention, will go for the default option and wouldn't even inspect alternatives. Then moving to our intervention, we find that providing information about the buy box algorithm, and not about the alternatives, but really about the selection mechanism, this shifts consumers' behavior. And the way it shifts consumers' behavior is through essentially two channels. So the first one is increasing consumers' willingness to search. So when we give them information, there is an increased share of consumers who are going to search the full list of options. And conditional on searching the full list on checking the full list of options, the share of consumers who are going to opt for the buy box winner is going to be decreasing. Then the second channel is a direct salience channel on consumers. So even when consumers do not pay the cost of checking all alternative deals, the fact that we give them information about the default selection still switches their selection behavior by pushing them to exploit all the options they have within the main product page. Lastly, moving to the evidence we get from, and again, in terms of deals, we see that this is when consumers opt out of the buy box, they don't go for worst options, but they essentially look for, in most of the cases, they look for cheaper options. And this evidence on consumers having incorrect somehow beliefs, and then after they get some transparent information, the fact that they realize they don't like so much the way this Amazon buy box algorithm works seems to be somewhat persistent over time. So even after 1 month, we see that consumers still hold a negative view of the buy box and would be willing to pay some money to opt out of this mechanism in our incentivized path. Okay, wrapping things up. Of course.
Hi, Michela.
Yes.
You 1 minute over, so maybe you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm done. I just wanted to say that of course our study has some limitations due to to the structure of the experiment, but we believe that the result that we document in terms of low consumers' literacy and the significance of these default effects goes beyond the specific example of Amazon, and also the fact that this information disclosure policy is effective could also offer some interesting insights for policymakers. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much, Michela. So we now have a 5-minute discussion by Leon Muzol from the Wharton School. So Leon, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Well, firstly, thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to discuss this paper. This is like the perfect paper for me to discuss. I read this with great interest. It's something I always wondered about while working on the buy box, because I take this sort of more structural perspective in my work. But you do wonder, do the customers who follow the buy box, do they actually know what they're clicking on? Do they even know that the buy box exists? And so it is just fantastic to see, such careful work done on exactly this question, informing customers about, what the buy box algorithm is and what it is not, and seeing such really stark responses, right? I did not expect coming into reading this paper that Michela would find such a strong response by customers shifting what they actually consider. So now, having said that, let me sort of dive into a couple of points in more detail. And this, I'm afraid, is going to be the most I/O discussion ever. So we're going to talk about preference heterogeneity, and then we're going to talk about equilibrium effects, which is, the two things IO economists always are interested in. So first thing is preference heterogeneity. One thing that really struck me in your paper, Michela, is that customers seem to not be happy with the buy box algorithm, right? But it's a bit unclear whether they are all unhappy with the buy box algorithm for the same reason. Like, I could imagine, for instance, the buy box algorithm really emphasizing Amazon offers, and the customers don't want to buy the Amazon offers. This is like the classic self-preferencing story that I examine a bit in my paper. However, I think it was slide 19 of your talk today. I think it's table 4 in the paper, maybe. You show the characteristics of the chosen offers. And you show that those characteristics mostly don't really change when you inform people about, how the buy box algorithm operates, which makes me think that it's not that everyone agrees, the buy box algorithm should focus more on shipping speed or focus less on something being an Amazon offer, which suggests maybe different people just have a different opinion, right? I care a lot about shipping speed. Maybe someone else cares a lot about, whether this is a major brand that's selling the item, something like that. And this preference heterogeneity, I think is just an interesting sort of angle to interpreting the results in your paper. Because, one interpretation is Amazon is unfairly sort of choosing an algorithm that doesn't express consumer preferences. But if those preferences are heterogeneous and they have to pick sort of one average algorithm, that does make it really hard to sort of expect them to, hit every person with the same algorithm, hit every person's preferences. Now, having said that, there is one clear result in that table, or at least sort of semi-clear result, which is people seem to prefer lower priced offers than the algorithm suggests to them, right? So that is a caveat to my discussion point here, which seems to be like Amazon is still slightly misaligned there on the price sensitivity. However, that brings me to sort of the second interesting point here, which is equilibrium effects. I think customers in like deciding which algorithm they prefer are pretty bad at modeling sort of the equilibrium impacts of changes in the algorithm, which is totally reasonable. Maybe you could argue even economists are pretty bad at that. But one thing that seems pretty clear is if you make the algorithm extremely price sensitive, then that's going to affect how many sellers are willing to enter Amazon. Amazon is already one of those environments where as a seller, it's incredibly tough. You see that actually a lot in the European antitrust cases where the European regulators care a little bit more about the sellers, and the sellers constantly complain, it's so tough to compete with Amazon. It's also tough to compete with other sellers. So if you made it more price sensitive, I wonder whether in equilibrium there'd be less sellers on Amazon, and that would actually end up not being so good for the consumers. So that's sort of the second point here, equilibrium effects. Let me just race through a couple of minor points here in my last minute. One is I really love this trend we have now in economics of doing sort of experiments on real consumers in settings that are very close to their real choice behavior settings. I do sometimes wonder a bit like whether we need more terminology. Like, I agree with you that relative to what other people called field experiments, this is a field experiment, but there is sort of some subtlety here because it is not an experiment where people, go home and they shop in their normal environment over like a month or something, and you use that data. So I would call it maybe like a lab in the field experiment. I also thought there was some results on time spent searching where you said, hey, there is no significant effect on time spent searching, but really the standard errors on those effects were quite large and they sort of almost supported doubling the amount of time spent searching. Probably doesn't matter because the time spent searching is so small anyhow. If you multiply it with a wage, like the search costs are going to be tiny anyhow. Finally, I think it'd be nice to look at sort of focusing in on more frequent shoppers a bit more. Probably Amazon cares a lot more about frequent shoppers, and I think that's something you could do with the data you have. I think that's me out of time. Let me just end by saying I really enjoyed this paper. I think it asks a really important question, and it gets incredibly nice and clean results on, the likelihood of choosing a buy box offer, say. And I did not expect those effects to be that stark. And so I think it's a great contribution to literature.